Hello, everyone. I think we're going to start in 5 minutes. I'll give a brief introduction about Beyingi. We're very happy to have him here at the museum, and all of you. I'll try to raise my voice a bit. I think this is the highest I can go. I'm Shaima. I'm the public program coordinator at the museum. Thank you all for coming and for staying. I know you've had such a long day. I'll introduce Beyingi briefly. So Beyingi Bouiziane was born in Jerusalem. He studied architecture in Paris, specializing in urban sociology in post-conflict areas. Through his research-based projects, Beyingi explores themes revolving around perception, heritage, territory, architecture, and landscape. He works with multiple media and relies on painting and drawing as his primary tools. Beyingi has exhibited extensively inside and outside of Palestine. Recent exhibitions include the 5th Jerusalem show, an actual and possible exhibition at العمل in Jerusalem, cross-sections in Vienna, contemporary artists and water issues in Lago Maggiore.
Lago Maggiore.
Maggiore.
I don't know how this is.
And the Sharjah Biennial in its 13th edition, to mention a few exhibitions. I'll leave the floor to Beyingi to tell us more about his work, The Temporary Ruin. And thank you.
Thank you, Selma. Hello, everyone. Some of you don't see me. Some of you see me. I'm very surprised there are so many people here, so thanks for coming. I don't know, maybe you want to get a bit closer, or you're okay, you hear me, you can move your chairs if you want.
Yeah.
Maybe, or I can stand up here, hello, it's okay. Some other people are coming. Bellesh, shall we start? So first, I will put into context what this project is about, and then I will enter into the project slowly. So, as Shaima mentioned, I work with multiple mediums. This project specifically, I started 10 years ago. When I came back from my studies, I'm from Jerusalem, from Bethlehem region. When I came back from my studies, I was really wondering what to do. I come with an architectural background and sociology background, and I always wanted to work in the cultural world and think in a critical way about questions related to territory, landscape, urban landscape, environment, like not non-urban landscape, also rural landscape. And so I was, of course, I was aware and acquainted with the 1968 master plan of Jerusalem, which is a unilateral a unilateral master plan that was done by the Israelis when they took over Jerusalem. And in this master plan, the idea is to create new borders of the Great Jerusalem. So what they would do, they would, after they draw the new boundaries, they would build on the limits of the new boundaries satellite neighborhoods, which are settlements technically, according to Geneva Conventions, the ones that are on the eastern side. And what happened later on is that the space in between this new settlement, this satellite settlement, and Jerusalem started being filled up slowly. So there's a big chunk of the traditional landscape that was surrounding Jerusalem disappeared. So I observed it at first hand with the settlement of Gilo, which is southwest Jerusalem, and then when they filled up the whole area in between. There's one place left. Living in Bethlehem, the view to the east always used to be this hill called Jabal Abu Ghneim, which used to be a rocky hill until the 60s when the Jordanian army planted pine forest there. And then in the 90s, the Israelis started uprooting the pine forest in order to build a settlement called today Chomat Shmuel in Hebrew. So my childhood I've seen the destruction of this hill during my childhood, and in between this hill and where I live there is a valley. And so when I came back, this valley was in some way still not touched, but I could sense that this valley's days are numbered and that this valley is going to disappear pretty soon. So it is a valley that not many people talk about. I mean, the owners of the lands, many of them are not even in the country anymore. They're from from Bet Sahur and Bethlehem, so many of them left. Those who are here do not have access to it anymore because of the identity status. So those of you who don't know what's happening here, depending on where you're born and whose child you are, etc., you'll have a different status. Me, I'm a Jerusalemite, so I have a Jerusalem ID. And this territory, since it's annexed, most of the owners, they have a West Bank ID, so they can't access that area. And also, I forgot to add that then, after the 90s, in 2003, they built the Israeli wall. I don't know how we're going to call this wall. I do not like the term separation wall, so I call it the Israeli wall. So they built the Israeli wall on the southern part of this valley, so it totally then cut off its inhabitants. And so I came back 2009, I started walking around that valley and thinking, okay, so this place is not going to exist for a long time. Nobody's doing any noise about it. Nobody's saying anything about it. And so I took it upon myself to create the archive of this whole valley. So I do, as I said, I started 10 years ago. The first iteration of this project was to draw in and to record all the remaining ruins in the valley. So it was a kind of it's a very classical project, I think, because in the first work dealt with the question of archive. This second work deals with the question of a cabinet of curiosity, or a very traditional kind of things, and a very classical way to deal with art, I would say. So in 2013, or when was it? Yeah, in 2013, 3 years after I started the work, I stumbled upon a map an Israeli map of the area, where they called this valley a green zone. So an environmentally protected zone. So that is another tool they use to expropriate land. It happened all over the West Bank, especially in Zone C. It's happening all over. So they will they'll create a set of laws in order for them to expropriate the land. So if a land becomes like protected because of environmental reasons, then you know that in the future they will find a means to expropriate it. What confused me a lot with this is that people like Jerusalemites, some in the construction field, they use the term as the valley of garbage, and it's a dump yard, that valley. And so it always was a paradox to me. Okay, how are they declaring it a natural zone while they're dumping everything there, while it's an official dump yard? In 2015, I saw for the first time the master plan for the valley. So what I was kind of thinking, I saw it confirmed, that it's only a matter of a few years that the valley will disappear. Or not disappear, I mean, will change its nature and become a part of the extension of the settlement. And then, yeah, also the same year, in 2015, they started the first building of infrastructure in the valley. So they built a highway there. But this valley is also interesting because it is sited in between the Green Line and the wall, and in between this complex fabric that is Jerusalem. We can talk about this later. And there is no real monument in that place. There's nothing like, yes, there is part of an aqueduct that passes there from the Roman period, but that's about it. So nobody will I mean, for those who decide what to preserve this valley didn't seem to be interesting. But by walking there every day for years and drawing and documenting things, I started discovering like a columbarium, which is basically a cave, which is a dwelling for pigeons, which is probably 2,500 years old. Then you have, of course, I was talking about this aqueduct and then some other cave dwellings. So I started seeing there is really a layered history in this valley that really interests me a lot, especially that we are in a situation where the way we interpret the past is the way we are writing the future. And we are in a real conflict here of discourse, of historical narrations in this country. And I've been observing quite a lot the Israeli Antiquity Department strategy. And of course they come here, they document everything, they store everything, but what interests them basically is one historical layer. The historical layer of their presence 2,000 years ago. So they will document everything that happened in between, pack it, and then try to give an impression of what it used to be like, this place, when they were here. This is this has always been a bit problematic for me, as it is not at all inclusive in the way we look at history, in the way we build identity. It's not inclusive of everybody that passed by in this place. For me, being a second generation Armenian here, I have a very different relationship to this landscape also. As I feel I'm from here, but my family came 100 years ago, you know. So, but it is this place of passage that interests me. And it is this, in this valley, it's multiple layers from probably the Greek period until today that interests me, in its good and in its bad aspects. So during those years, I was collecting all these objects. Whatever I would find and would interest me, I would collect it. And I would try not to discriminate what I'm collecting. Like some of the things come from the flora, some things from the fauna, some things from war, some things that are more like just daily life stuff, old, new. And I didn't, so for years and years and years I'm gathering all those objects. I know for a fact I come from a place that is so overly politicized that I just need to come to an exhibition and say, well, I'm documenting a valley before the Israelis are going to destroy it. Immediately people will come say, come exhibit. Of course, this is the problem of being also Palestinian, that we're also projected, that we have to answer to these things. We're projected to create a work that always has to talk about the occupation, as if our existence and our culture is built by this occupation. And so for me, it's always been like, I mean, okay, it's very difficult for me. What do I do with these objects? They already contain so much. They're like, they contain, so in itself, I will just take out something from the box. So now we can play a bit. It's supposed to be interactive. So of course, if I pick this up, like, I mean, this contains by itself enough. I don't need to talk anymore. And so I'm thinking, because of the geography it is, because of all the projections we have from all over, because of the situation we're living in, that is not that we're suffering from, this object, they take another meaning, all those objects. They become something else. And it has to do a lot with questions of perception, in a sense that perception, if I'm holding this in a kind of distorted angle, yeah, you're going to perceive what it is. No, you will not see something in perspective necessarily. So in our perception is already constructed in our imaginary. And I think we do not measure the way images fabricate our imaginary, specifically from places we do not know necessarily. So so when I first got invited to reflect upon all these objects, I had no clue what to do. I thought in the beginning I'm not going to show any object, it's because I'm not able to control the projections that they contain. And so I started thinking, okay, I will just, of course my strategy initially is to create an archive of the valley, is to document the valley, and because nobody is doing it, and I think for me it's a personal thing, and I think it's important to do that. But in the ideology of my preservation, I want to be all-inclusive. As you can see here, I have things of all kinds of different periods and different nature and mixed up together. And not excluding really anything for the good, as I said, for the good and the bad, because the story is what it is, you know. And so I'm trying to gather where I am. It is a bit difficult to explain so many years of work in a short span. So I was talking about perception and the fact that all these objects for me already contain so much. And the problem when you're just bringing in an object that contains so much already, that is so overly politicized already, what does it do to the artist? Our work doesn't become autonomous anymore because our work exists in the realm of the imaginary, of the viewer already. And this confrontation, this tension for me was problematic. So I started thinking, okay, I'm going to do is really document all the objects. But in this project of the temporary ruin, the whole thing, I'm documenting everything but without a camera. I'm documenting everything with my own eye and my own hand. I'm not using any props or anything like that because I think it's very personal. And I think also in a question of medium, I'm very much interested in drawing and painting. I always say I don't call myself a painter, but I say that these are my main tools. And I see them as tools in order to achieve something. And so for me, it became a question of I'm going to take an object and try to find something interesting, a kind of interesting angle that I could look at it, that it might remind me of something that it is not. So this is what I was kind of looking through drawing every object. I was trying to either I would suspend it in a certain way, give it a weird angle, so as you don't really know what it is in the first sight when you look at it. So it's kind of between perception, what is already in your imaginary, there's this pure perception is the data sense, when you're just sensing something for what it is. Like, is this what could this be? This is a car license plate, but totally in a distorted perspective. So trying to push another meaning to it. I don't know what kind of meaning. I'm not suggesting anything particular. I'm just suggesting to make a comment on the way we perceive past, the way we select and preserve things. That's it. And I'm also trying to challenge preconceived imaginaries. This is what interests me a lot. And so I started documenting all these objects with one brush, just sitting in a dark room, specifically for this project. I chose to sit in a dark room because colors come up much more than in our heavy light, Palestinian light. So I would place the object in a weird way and try to document its materiality, document its texture, document everything else. And but then at some point I decided I will confront the image with the object. I will also, as being somebody, as I created an archive, and this time I'm creating a cabinet of curiosity, a kind of mini museum of the valley, I will confront the object to its image and see what happens. This is a hypothesis, it's not a claim for anything. And because also I think when you produce the first image, you're already starting to create the image in the imaginary. In general, if we take semantics, for example, in semiology, yeah, one can take you can like pass. Yeah, no problem. You guys can play with it. I mean, when I came here, I saw many pieces have changed places. The idea basically is to keep it closed. So it's also in the design of I can talk about the design of the box, of course. It's, as you can notice, it's a fragmented cube. And it's built in different pieces. This is a prototype. It's built in different pieces, and you can disassemble the pieces, and you can change the order as you like. It's like the way we deal with history, basically. We're always playing with the order. We're always rewriting it. And also to be a bit labyrinthic, so you open a door, then you have another door, and then you have another door, and eventually it's this kind of digging a bit into the subject. Let's see. Maybe I could answer some questions. If somebody has some comments, it would be maybe easier. Like,
why can't you close it? Like, why was
because okay, so the reason is so I collected all those pieces, but I need to preserve them somehow. So this is basically the preservation boxes. So you can close them and you can move them, and you can assemble them in different ways as you like, basically. So there is, as you can see here, there are these four holes for the designers. I know you guys are designers. So this is basically the grid. So there's a grid in which you can move it and just screw and unscrew it. So it makes it quite flexible.
Why do you feel the urgency to bring the object and to put it in contraposition to your own perspective?
It was after long conversations with a few curators and also the curator of this show in the beginning that we were always debating whether to bring these objects or not. And as I was saying earlier, for me it was always, I think the objects contain too much. I'll just show their image. But I got convinced to show this gesture, basically. To show this gesture of the object and the image. What did I collect, what did I see, and how did I play with its perspective, and also then to bring this kind of interactive piece. Because I also want it to be interactive. Something I'm doing quite a lot, I'm doing action sculptures, for me, which are very interesting, that I want the more, because as I was saying, for me, the more I'm producing art here, the more I'm thinking, the more it's becoming difficult for me just to work with the visual sense. Because for me, the visual sense is the one that gets most of the images, and then that constructs our imaginary. So I want also to engage the public with other senses than just the eyes. So in this case, open the box, play with it. I was happy to see there was a big mess. I wasn't so happy to see that some pieces got a bit broken, but it's part of the work, you know. I picked it up, they were already in a process of entropy, and every time they enter somewhere else, the entropy continues and time goes by. This was the reason. I was convinced then it would be maybe important to really start bringing out like these interactive pieces.
But then it's like you have two ways of archiving, no? Like
Yeah.
your own perspective, or like
Yeah.
your perception, and like maybe.
But what if I need to take it? For example, what if I want to show it where I cannot show the objects? What if I want to, like, I'm doing the archiving to do my own documentation, of course. So I'm producing all these images, whether it's landscape images or images of the object, I'm producing them. This is for me eventually to create maybe a book. That is what I hope for. And then, of course, the objects, I'm preserving them. This is why I'm building these preservation boxes. Yeah, they're like, but also I want to, in this case, emphasize, basically. So I'm playing with scale, as you can see. I'll take another object out. I think I saw it somewhere here. It's also, here is this piece, here is this piece. You see the difference of scale. So I want to bring forward, basically, this idea, that I'm playing with the scale. That when you look at this, then you go see the object, then you maybe something happens. Maybe you start thinking. This actually is to hold, to see if something is straight when you're building a house.
Can I ask you
Yeah.
something? When you talk about semiotic and you say that we always have a problem when we see something that we have already another picture of,
Yeah.
we know the meaning of the picture. Why, for me, then I would have the question why you draw it, because you stay in the same medium, you stay in the picture.
Yeah, I say in the picture. Yeah.
And why not maybe choose another sense, like maybe touching, smelling, or whatever, where it's not, together with the picture, because otherwise you work
With the,
with the
I,
meaning of the picture.
I understand what you're saying. So yes, I am working with images, and I will always work with images. This is why I am drawing them, and this is why I'm drawing them in another perspective and trying to look at them differently. And since I'm talking about semiotics, about images and imaginary, and then so sign and signifier and how all this becomes basically the signifier of our imaginary. This is the things that interest me. So therefore, I might be failing every time I do it, but therefore I'm painting things and I'm suggesting another image of the image that is pre-existing. I'm trying to suggest how do I challenge this image that already exists through an image. Maybe I'm wrong, but more and more I've been doing sculptures that have no images in them also. So, but it has always been a challenge, because I always thought the more we draw this wall, the more the wall exists in people's imaginary, the more Palestine can't exist without the wall, and we go etc., etc. As what are we actually fabricating? We are fabricating a normalization of an image. And this is what scares me, especially when dealing with art in this context here. That I can ask people, okay, art has been politicized, there were many reasons, for example, in the 60s, 70s, but we lived in very different times. We lived with two different poles. We had the USSR and we have the communist and capitalist entity. Today we live in uber-capitalism. It's globalized. So I start having a fundamental disbelief that an image of a situation actually helps a situation. This is where I have a bit, so it becomes very difficult. How do you talk about such a difficult topic that you feel the urge to talk about it because of the community that lives around it, but without commodifying it simply as that. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering. Sorry.
Yeah,
It's okay.
please.
I actually like the idea that you, as the artist, are doing different paintings, and you're playing with the size, and you're playing with the side that you're taking from the object, because then that allows me to do the same. So instead of me taking just one perspective, which is the artist's perspective, I know that I have the right to distort it or to work with it or to put my imagination into it. That's how I felt.
Well, I take this as a compliment, but because this is what I would like people actually to notice. You are free to your perception of things. Yeah.
And that has two sides also of it, because then you would open the argument towards this is my view, this is your view, and then the argument.
Yeah,
would
that's
be
the
two
6 and 9.
sides.
which one?
Yes.
But this is the essential problem, of course.
And it could go into positive direction, or it could go into a negative direction. It depends then on the interpretations. On how are you looking at each of the objects or any of the items, and how are you interpreting it? Which opens the dialogue, I think.
There's also, for instance, you said you don't create any hierarchy between the different found objects.
Yeah.
So that a gun can be next to a fossil, or can be next to a measurement instrument. But isn't there implicitly, when we flatten hierarchies of this kind, aren't we also somehow giving them the same normalcy?
Well, I mean, I'm already archiving, so of course.
I'm just asking.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. And I think everything has an ideology. Even when I'm talking, I'm embedded with ideology. of course. And I think this is something not to say, oh, because I'm leftist, I'm not ideological. No, not at all. I'm very ideological and I assume it. And I think this is, for me, yeah, of course, maybe I should have just left them there in that sense. But to bring them all together, I mean, it was for me just a reaction to how, in general, we are selecting and preserving, and how we choose to select and preserve memory in the context here of this conflict that create then discourses that exist here. I mean, talking especially this a critique on the way, for example, the Israeli Antiquity Department deals with it, and also a way for the Palestinian Antiquity Department as they work in both cases. That's why I want to bring everything, put everything on the table and say, this is what the landscape has left to us. This is not what I chose the landscape to leave for us, which is a big difference in the way we then construct future, I think. So for me, it's also very important, I think, debate today in the Palestinian context, as the Palestinians are still trying to figure out what's the national discourse here. And I think it's very important to not fall into these, to like what's happening with national discourses today all over the world that is getting more and more entrenched to some kind of right-wing identity discourses. And this is exactly, for example, this Israeli strategy, of course, as I said, they archive everything, but their strategy is what helped them build the discourse of their belonging here. A very selective approach to history. And I think this selective approach to history, nobody is immune to it. Any crazy nationalist is not immune to it. They will be selectively choosing history. And for me, this is important. It can be disturbing for some people, but I mean, what can I do? You know, I just go there. I try to pick up things, and I try to be spam time in many ways. Like I have some objects. Let's see. I actually didn't bring. This is most probably 1,000 years old. So what I do, for example, to find such pieces, I go behind looters, and the looters, they dig holes, and I get access to the lower levels, so I can pick older fragments. But I didn't bring the older fragments I had, because also I don't want problems from the antiquity department to know that I've been collecting all these things. And yeah, so I try to bring things that are maybe 1,000 years old, and maybe, let's see, how old can I get? Okay, this is more interesting. This is a piece of a mill. This is volcanic rock. It doesn't come from the valley. There is no volcanic rock in that area. It's limestone mostly. It comes most probably from the Julan, which is in the north. And this is most probably from the Hellenistic period. So we're talking about 2,400 years old object, piece. So then I bring a piece of plastic. So I mean, I try to have this ideology of inclusion, yeah. I think also I'm mixed a bit in my identity here. I think it's important to open up discourses of identity, especially today, I think.
You said you exhibited it already before, or your archive?
Yeah, I exhibited this piece in the Jerusalem show, which was 6 months before this show. And the first chapter of it I exhibited 5 years ago.
And when you exhibited it again, or also in Jerusalem, did you choose different objects? And based on which criteria did you choose it?
No, because I can tell this is maybe 70% of the objects. The other 30% are at home. It's not as if I collected thousands of stuff, you know. Like I'm also trying to collect things that I didn't collect every shoe, because I found many shoes actually, but for some reason. But because people walk there, and passage and time and all that. So I didn't collect everything, but I try to be kind of selective. Like I have things who come from construction site, I have things who come from war, things who come from like tools. these are basically the big theme, but these are themes of general daily life, you know, like we build, we fight, and we eat. I don't know. Like so I'm not so sure how to put it. But yeah, the important thing I think about this project is it is for me just to, you know, and it's a sad project, I would say, because it will finish when the valley disappears. When the place is gone, there's no more project.
You don't think that it can then work as an archive of something that is gone?
They will work as something else then, yeah, for sure. But that's why I'm doing it. I mean, that's why I'm working on this for 10 years, and I take it upon myself. The funniest was when I bumped into the Israeli Antiquity Department archaeologists that were doing a survey there. It was hilarious. So there was one Russian Jewish, so he was the head, and with the assistant, one was American Jewish and one was Arab Jewish. So kind of these three entities in this valley, and me, Armenian from here. It was kind of bizarre, and we started discussing because I was there painting. I usually take my easel and I take my stuff and I go paint like a romantic painter. This is another story, and we started discussing. I started asking, why are you guys here? Because of the highway? He said, oh, don't worry, in a few years there's no more valley. We're just documenting it quickly. Then we started talking about different things. And then we're discussing because they had just demolished a cave with a columbarium. There were two there, and they had just demolished one further down in the valley to build something. And yeah, I mean, like I told to them, yeah, there's another one there. They said, where? We need to document everything, because these were like, they're pretending to be serious archaeologists doing their work, or documenting everything, but at the end of the day, for what? For its destruction, and that's it. And so in this sense, I started calling it like a preemptive act of archaeology, what I'm doing in a sense. Using this word preemptive that they use a lot in the conflict jargon, they're doing preemptive attacks. So I'm doing preemptive archaeology, yeah. And yeah, so, and yeah, for me this is probably the most academic and classical project I'm doing. I don't even believe I'm doing this. I'm sitting, drawing these things, I'm drawing very clear landscapes, I'm doing it. But why am I painting? It's also, I think, coming to images now and coming, why am I painting? I'm painting because I think first of all it's a language that helps us see the world in a different way than a photography or than a sculpture or than any language. So I decide really to work with this medium because of what it can bring. And second of all, I will paraphrase John Berger because I don't have the quote here, but it's the relationship to painting is really this kind of relationship to expand time, trying to preserve time. I take a picture of something, I freeze time. It's the instant I pressed on the button will be revealed. But when I'm drawing these objects, it's every time I look at an object, it's another time that I'm registering. So I'm trying even through the medium, through my reflection on the medium, trying to expand the time of these objects, what they mean. But this is something more in kind of me thinking about the medium itself and why I paint and what's the relationship between this medium and time.
$10 for the project, yes?
For the time being.
For the time being. Is there some object that you wish that you have picked up one
Yes,
day?
and it got stolen.
Uh-huh.
It was because in that valley there are two quarries actually from the 19th century, Mahajer, and that were basically for the 19th century buildings basically. Slayeb is nearby, it's not in the valley, then there's white and then there's gray. And so there was this beautiful but huge carved stone. For years I would go look at it and think, if only I could carry this home.
Did you draw it?
Sorry?
Did you draw
I drew it, yeah. I have drawings of it. But not the object itself, I have drawings of the area with the stone. And one day I come there and I'm like, oh my God, came and took it. But I've been stumbling on a lot of people who loot there. Often somebody with a worker. They come with a metal detector, the worker digs a hole, and then they find, they go. Yeah, there are objects. There are things I didn't pick up, and then I regretted, and then I went to look for them, and I couldn't find them. So it happens, you know. Also because when I go there, sometimes I'm carrying with me a lot of equipment because I'm carrying with me my easel, my paint, some bags, water, some food. Because in general, it's okay. If I'm going to the valley, I know it's 5-6 hours. I will be there to go up and back. Luckily, my studio is just above the valley. This is another coincidence, but yeah, there are things that. There is also half a wheel of olive press in the valley, so you see half the wheel, and somebody has talked to me about something I never found. Because there is a few shepherds who still use ta'amre, that still use the valley. They graze their sheep there. So sometimes I sit with them and we talk, and one of them was telling to me there is this one cave with this bas-relief of an eagle, but I never found it. So this still remains a mystery. I have to go find the eagle sculpture there.
If you don't have any other questions, I think we finished. Thanks a lot for coming. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to my confusing explanation.